welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're going to get into a really specific viewpoint on 9/11. Our main source here is an audio recording from Major General Albert Newton Stubblebine III, U.S. Army, retired of course.
And his background is pretty key to understanding where he's coming from. We're talking 32 years in the military. He ended up overseeing the Army's strategic intelligence forces worldwide. So analysis, threat assessment, that was his world.
Exactly. And this recording, it really maps out how his thinking on 9/11 changed over time. On the day itself, he was actually in Hawaii for a conference.
Right. And he talks about getting this phone call super early in the morning from a former officer telling him basically the U.S. is at war. His first reaction was disbelief.
Yeah, like, what are you talking about? Then he turns on the TV and sees the towers falling. He describes it as just pure shock.
And his intelligence brain kicked in immediately. His first thought was, okay, this info had to be in the system somewhere. It must have been missed, you know, or maybe misinterpreted.
So initially, he's thinking along the lines of, well, a terrorist attack from outside the U.S. The official story, more or less.
Pretty much. But then things started to shift for him.
Yeah, the recording talks about this turning point. It wasn't like a light switch moment, more gradual. It started with questions his wife was asking, apparently.
And then his own really close look at that photo of the Pentagon damage.
And you can hear he talks about his fundamental trust in the government. It was a real struggle for him to even consider other possibilities.
Well, yeah, that makes sense. Someone that high up, career, military intelligence, you'd expect a deep loyalty. Questioning the official line, for him, that would have been a huge deal, a real internal conflict.
Okay, so let's unpack that Pentagon photograph bit. He didn't just glance at it.
No, not at all. He describes it as like a detailed analysis, taking measurements, comparing the hole to what a Boeing 757 impact should look like, in his view.
And his conclusion.
Pretty blunt. He says, quote, "The airplane did not make that hole."
And he made a point of saying this publicly, using his rank, right, to give it weight.
Yes. He emphasized being a high-ranking officer making such a claim. He clearly felt it was a serious discrepancy.
Now, just to be clear, the official reports do say the damage was consistent with the 757. They mentioned finding engine parts, other debris inside.
Correct. That's the established finding. But Stubblebine looked at the visual evidence, the hole itself, and reached a different conclusion.
He also talks about a turbine engine part found in the wreckage.
Yeah, he notes it looked to him visually similar to a turbine from a missile.
But he's careful there, right? He admits he couldn't prove it.
Exactly. He distinguishes between what he observed, or thought he observed, and what he could definitively prove. That's kind of key to his approach.
And then there's this whole thing about the Pentagon's security cameras, the external sensors.
Right. He brings up the point that reportedly almost all of them were turned off that day, except for one.
Just one. And what did that one show, according to him?
Well, he says the image from that one sensor, when he first saw it, didn't look like an airplane. And he goes further, claiming that the imagery was later altered, changed somehow to look more like an airplane?
Altered. That's a pretty strong claim. These sensors, they're supposed to pick up activity around the building.
Yeah, that's their job. He's basically saying the data from the one working sensor initially showed something anomalous, something that didn't fit the 757 profile.
Okay, let's shift gears to the Twin Towers. The collapse. Stubblebine raises the issue of the heat needed to melt steel girders, the structural steel.
Right. He argues that the jet fuel fire, well, it just couldn't get hot enough to actually melt that steel.
That's a point you hear a lot in alternative theories.
It is. Now, the official explanation isn't that the steel melted per se. It's that the heat, even below melting point, combined with the massive impact damage,
Weakened the steel enough for it to fail.
exactly, weakened its integrity, leading to a progressive collapse. That's the core of the NIST report findings.
But Stubblebine saw something else. He talks about those puffs of smoke.
Yes, the little explosions or ejections seen coming out of the sides of the towers floor by floor as they came down.
How did he interpret those?
For him, those puffs were evidence. Evidence of controlled demolition, like small charges going off sequentially to bring the building down cleanly.
Which is totally different from the official explanation.
Totally. The official view is that those puffs were just air and debris being violently pushed out as each floor pancaked down onto the one below it.
So like compressed air blowing out windows and dust.
Essentially, yeah. But Stubblebine reads it as detonation signatures. So his conclusion: the planes caused damage, yes, but the collapse, that was demolition.
Okay, then there's Building 7. World Trade Center Building 7.
the third tower to collapse that day, and crucially, it wasn't hit by a plane.
Right. He points out there was a fire, yeah, but seemingly contained to a lower corner. Didn't look like enough to bring down a whole skyscraper in his assessment.
And this is where Larry Silverstein comes in, the building's owner. Stubblebine calls him Silverstein.
Ah, yes. The Pullet comment. That's famous or infamous, depending on your view.
It is. Stubblebine refers to that video clip where Silverstein talks about the decision regarding Building 7 and uses the phrase, pull it.
And Stubblebine takes that literally, as in demolish it.
Yes. He interprets pull it as, like, demolition jargon, a code phrase giving the green light to bring the building down via controlled demolition.
Now, in the demolition world, pull it can mean deciding to go ahead with a planned demolition, right? After safety checks.
It can, yes. But Stubblebine's interpretation is more direct. He thinks it was an order to detonate charges.
He also mentioned some other stuff about Building 7, things he'd heard.
Yeah, he brings up some unverified points, like he'd heard the building had recently been reinsured specifically against damage from things like plane strikes.
And something about database systems being shut down nearby.
Right. But it's really important here, he prefaces this as stuff he heard. It's not presented as confirmed fact within the recording itself.
Good distinction. The pull it comment is on video. We know that exists. The other stuff, less clear, at least from this source.
Absolutely. It's vital to separate his analysis based on his expertise from secondhand information he's relaying.
Okay, let's broaden out. He talks about other anomalies, bigger picture questions, like air defenses.
Yes, this is a big one for him. He alleges that all U.S. air defense systems were shut down on 9/11.
All of them. What was the supposed reason?
He mentions the reported reason was that the vice president was temporarily located in Colorado for security.
Okay. But shutting down air defenses while under attack, that strikes him as odd.
Extremely odd from his military perspective. He questions the logic of disabling defenses precisely when they're most needed.
And there was something else related to this. An exercise.
Uh-huh. He brings up reports of an air defense exercise happening that same day. And here's the kicker. The exercise supposedly simulated attacks on the World Trade Center towers using airplanes.
Wait, an exercise simulating exactly what was happening, running at the same time air defenses were supposedly down?
That's what he presents. He calls the coincidence weirdly strange.
Weirdly strange seems like an understatement, if that's accurate.
Well, yeah. Official explanations usually frame these exercises as routine, unfortunate coincidences. But someone like Stubblebine, with his background,
Sees it differently. He sees potential connections, maybe coordination.
he definitely views the timing and nature of it all with deep suspicion. It's another dot, as he calls it.
Right, the dots. He uses that analogy for intelligence work, doesn't he?
He does, collecting pieces of information, the dots, and then trying to connect them to see the bigger picture.
So connecting his dots, the Pentagon hole, the tower collapses, Building 7, the air defense situation, the exercise, what picture did he see?
His conclusion was stark. The story told in the media, the official narrative, wasn't the real story. It just didn't add up for him.
Too many inconsistencies between the official line and what he believed the evidence showed.
Exactly. The dots just didn't connect to form that picture. They formed something else.
And he talks about how this affected him personally,
Yeah.
right? His whole belief system.
Yeah, quite profoundly.
Mhm.
He describes moving from this place of, deep-seated trust in the government, his government, to seriously questioning what actually happened that day.
That's a huge shift for anyone, let alone a retired major general.
Absolutely. It suggests how strongly he felt about his analysis, that it led him to fundamentally reevaluate things he'd believed in for decades.
So it boils down to these massive questions he's left with.
Pretty much. Who was the real enemy? Who planned it all, and why?
Were the hijackers the terrorists in Arab clothing, as he puts it, the whole story? Or was there involvement somehow from people inside the U.S. government, maybe even the White House?
Those are the explosive questions his perspective leads to, challenging the very foundation of the accepted 9/11 narrative.
Okay, so let's try and wrap up this deep dive into Major General Stubblebine's view. He fundamentally questions the physical evidence at the Pentagon, the reasons for the Twin Towers collapses, and especially the collapse of Building 7.
Yeah, his core points are Pentagon damage doesn't fit a 757. The towers in Building 7 look like controlled demolition, not fire-induced collapse. Plus, these really troubling anomalies around air defense being down and that simultaneous, weirdly specific exercise.
And it's crucial, again, to frame this properly. This is his analysis, his interpretation, drawing heavily on his military intelligence background.
Absolutely. It stands in marked contrast to the official investigations and the narrative most people know.
So we've explored his perspectives, these points of contention he raised.
Which leaves us, and you listening, with something to think about. Given these questions, these inconsistencies highlighted by someone like Stubblebine, what other possibilities might exist? Does his analysis hold water for you, or do the official explanations seem more plausible?
It really underscores the importance of looking critically at major events, doesn't it? Maybe doing your own research, considering different viewpoints.
Definitely. Food for thought, long after the events themselves.